This isn't my story, but I witnessed everything unfold, so I feel compelled to share it. For nearly 20 years, I've lived in a modest two-story home with my husband, Benjamin. Our kids have all moved out to start their own lives. And I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. A new neighbor moved into the house across the street, which was a relief. I was tired of looking at an empty house. Being retired, I spent a lot of time on our front porch reading, and enjoying the weather with Benjamin. I also listened to true crime podcasts and played music. The new resident was a young man, probably in his mid-20s. He drove a sleek BMW and dressed in flashy clothes, making me wonder if he was well off or just pretending. However, he was genuinely nice. After a few days, he introduced himself as Quinn, a recent college graduate. Quinn was bright and got along well with Benjamin. They chatted about sports, and Benjamin even shared some old college stories I hadn't heard in ages. Quinn mentioned working in the entertainment industry, doing freelance work for an internet personality. It went over my head, but he seemed to be doing well financially, as he discussed stocks and investments with Benjamin. For a few months, everything was normal. I often saw Quinn wave to me when he left his house, and I always waved back. Eventually, I noticed a young woman visiting frequently. She drove a little white convertible and was quite pretty, young, blonde, and dressed a bit provocatively, which I didn't quite appreciate. I assumed she was his girlfriend, possibly checking on the house while he was out. She had her own key, so it made sense. This became a regular occurrence, with her visiting once or twice a week while Quinn was away. I didn't fully understand their relationship, but I kept my opinions to myself, recognizing that young people date differently these days. Then, one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat, confirming my suspicions. But soon after, things took a tense turn. One afternoon, while tending to my garden, I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the young woman were in his driveway, arguing intensely. I couldn't catch their words, but she was animated, throwing her hands in frustration. It looked like she might strike him. After a heated exchange, she got into her car, slammed the door, and sped off. Quinn shook his head and went inside, seemingly unaware of my presence. I figured it was just a lover's quarrel. Every couple has them, and it wasn't my place to interfere. But then I noticed her car parked in front of his house when he wasn't home multiple times. I mentioned it to Benjamin, who thought it was best to stay out of it and leave Quinn alone. I agreed, but I couldn't shake my concern. Then came the night everything changed. Benjamin and I were asleep when we were jolted awake by sirens outside. We rushed out to join other neighbors gathering to see what was happening. Quinn's house was swarming with police cars and an ambulance. I watched in shock as officers emerged with the young woman in handcuffs. She didn't resist or scream, just stared ahead blankly. Meanwhile, Quinn was wheeled out on a stretcher, bloodied and battered. I gasped at the sight. We didn't see Quinn for a week, and I worried about him when he finally returned. Benjamin and I went over to check on him. He welcomed us and shared his story. The young woman, Ellie, had confessed everything to the police, making their job easier. She wasn't supposed to have a key. She had stolen his spare and made a copy. According to Quinn, she began demanding extravagant gifts, fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she became possessive and angry, which led to their relationship deteriorating each time she showed up unannounced. Quinn was unaware she was tracking him through his phone. She had invaded his privacy, even planting hidden cameras in his room. Every time she visited while he was out, she was replacing the camera batteries and ensuring they were operational. The argument I overheard was Quinn trying to break up with her. She refused, and he reluctantly agreed to take a break. Ellie had seen everything through the cameras, and the following night, she came to his house armed with a knife. I won't delve into the details, but Quinn managed to subdue her, though not before she seriously injured him. The doctor later said he was a hair's breadth away from needing surgery or worse. Benjamin and I tried to comfort him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned a valuable lesson about flaunting his wealth, especially around attractive women. Not long after, he moved out, saying he didn't feel safe in that house anymore. He expressed concern that Ellie had friends just like her who might know where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray he's doing okay. No one should have to endure such an experience, especially not someone as young as him. My name is Garrett, and this story takes place during my sophomore year of college. After not securing a dorm for my second year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Ultimately, I ended up in a co-op, a part of a 3-house community that was somewhat near campus. But not really. It wasn't the best situation, but it was affordable. And I didn't have many alternatives. Plus, I had a bike, so the extra travel time didn't bother me much. Most of my housemates were fellow students, but there were a few exceptions, some alumni, a couple of TIS, and a few older individuals pursuing degrees later in life. However, one resident stood out to me, an older woman living in one of the other houses. She appeared to be in her late 50s, though she looked older. With graying hair and a slight limp, likely due to a back injury, she was quiet and kept to herself, often wearing a blank expression. I assumed she had some connection to the university, perhaps as faculty or an alumna, but no one offered an explanation, and I didn't ask. The first odd encounter happened in our common kitchen, which was strange since the other houses had their own. She wasn't cooking or eating, just standing silently while the rest of us prepared dinner and chatted. She didn't engage with anyone, just observed us blankly. A few moments later, I caught her gaze a couple of times, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me specifically, though I knew that was unlikely. It felt strange that no one acknowledged her presence. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, while doing homework, I glanced out my bedroom window and saw her staring up at me, not on the sidewalk but right in the middle of the street. It was getting late and quite cold. I wondered why she was out there. I couldn't tell if she was looking directly into my window or just in my general direction, but it felt personal. In a moment of impulse, I waved at her, trying to be friendly. Instantly, I regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down excitedly before running toward one of the other houses, presumably hers. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I had confirmed she had been staring at me. That night, I asked a housemate about her. He said the woman had always been there and advised me to ignore her like everyone else did. When I probed further, he admitted he didn't know much and was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved in. And satisfied, I kept asking around until I finally got some clarity. A senior from her house mentioned she was affiliated with the university and was a bit eccentric, but had no history of violence. When I asked why no one found that odd, he explained that the property manager decided who lived there, and they had little control over it. I tried to put it out of my mind, but things escalated. One night, I nearly bumped into her in the hallway, standing directly in front of my door. It was past midnight on a Tuesday. The house was mostly quiet. She didn't say a word or react, simply turned and walked away as if I had interrupted her. There were several more unsettling encounters. I often caught her snooping around where she had no business being. Eventually, I lost my room key. All 3 houses, once part of a hotel, had their own locks. I usually kept my door locked, so losing the key was a big inconvenience. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly, and sure why, until I heard a soft bumping sound coming from my closet every 20 seconds. Something was shifting behind the door. Not one to scare easily, I decided to handle it myself. Taking a deep breath, I approached the closet, my heart racing. In one swift motion, I flung the door open and yelled. To my shock, the woman was inside, wearing one of my ties around her neck and holding a kitchen knife. My scream startled her, and before I could react, she lunged at me with the knife. I screamed again, this time in pure terror. I managed to wrestle her to the ground and disarm her, given her frail stature. The struggle was terrifying. She kicked and fought as I pinned her, calling for help. Soon, my housemates came running. My friend Lee helped me hold her down while someone called the police. The rest of the night became a blur. The police arrived quickly and arrested her. By then, she had stopped screaming but refused to say anything, which was unsettling. They found my lost key on her. Weeks later, we learned who she was. She was the property manager's sister, living there without proper supervision. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her the help she needed, he had just placed her in an unoccupied room. The property manager was later arrested for neglect and other offenses, and rightfully so. I found myself feeling more anger toward him than her. I pity her, but that doesn't change the fact that she tried to harm me. I still wonder why she seems so fixated on me. I can only hope nothing like that ever happens again. I'm graduating soon, and while I'll miss college, that night will forever linger in my memory. You know that space between sleep and waking, where the world hasn't quite clicked into place. That's where I was. And in that haze, I heard it. Not the wind. It was something, sliding slowly against the grain of the wood, right outside my front door. The night was dead still. Not a breath of air. I knew what wind sounded like. This was not the wind. By the time I'd mustered the courage to open the door, the street was empty, silent. Nothing but the orange glow of the street lights. And sitting right in the center of my welcome mat was a small, brown package. No postage. No address. No name. Just rough, brown cardboard, tied shut with a single length of wine. Wrapped so tight it looked like it was strangling the box. A new neighbor had moved in across the street a few weeks back, a man. I'd only seen him once, unloading boxes from a rust-eaten blue pickup truck. Didn't say much. Just gave me a smile. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a practiced one. Like he'd learned how to do it from a picture. He said he'd introduce himself properly soon. I thought maybe this was his idea of a proper introduction. The package felt warm, not sun-warmed, a deep, biological warmth, like it had been held against a chest for a very long time. Back inside, with the door locked and chained, I worked the twine loose. I unfolded the cardboard flaps, and I found photographs, a stack of them, neat, precise. My breath hitched, stopped cold. It was me, every single one. Me reading on the couch, taken from outside the living room window. Me at the stove, shot from the backyard through the kitchen door. Me playing with my dog, from an angle high up, like from a tree in the neighboring yard. Ordinary moments, captured from impossible places. Then, I got to the last one. My blood turned to ice. It was me, sleeping. The angle was low, intimate, level with my bed. My face was turned toward the camera, my blanket pulled up to my chin. I could see the faint, green glow of my alarm clock on the nightstand, 3:18 a.m. Whoever took this wasn't outside. They were in here, in my room, standing right over me. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? Hello, officer. Someone took a very polite, well-composed picture of me napping. There was no forced entry, no threat, just this intimate violation, this gift. At night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I barricaded myself on the couch. Every creak of the house was a footstep. Every sigh of the pipes was a breath. The next morning, I saw him, the new neighbor, standing in his driveway, perfectly still, holding a chipped, white mug. He wasn't drinking, just staring directly at my house, at my window. At me. He saw me looking. Slowly, mechanically, he raised his hand. A single, stiff wave. I forced a smile. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. That evening, I was trying to eat, jumping at every sound. It wasn't on the door. It was on the window. Right beside me. I froze. My fork clattered onto the plate. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stared at the curtain, waiting for a shadow, A shape, anything, nothing. Just the gentle sway of the fabric, like someone had just brushed past it. Later, when my nerves were somewhat settled, I found it. Another package. Same brown cardboard. Same viciously tight twine. It was just there, on my coffee table. I didn't hear it arrive. I didn't hear anyone come in. It was just waiting for me. My hands shook as I tore it open. More photos. These were different, grainy, blurry. The shaky, hurried shots of a When I moved into my new place, I was seeking a fresh start. I won't delve into specifics, but let us just say a bad situation with an ex-maid staying in my old city impossible. I came into some money early in life and made poor choices about the women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I chose is lovely, low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses are well spaced, which attracted me. However, the property next to mine is much closer than the others. That house is enormous. When I first saw it, I thought, you could easily fit a family of 10 in there. Honestly, I assumed a big family lived there, great-grandparents included. I couldn't have been more wrong. Despite trying to be low-key, I wasn't about to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the area. For some reason, I decided to meet my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else seemed kind and genuine. About 90% were parents of young kids. Yes, they were slightly intimidating, given their apparent success. I wasn't sure how a younger guy like me would blend into such a community, but that was a personal concern when I finally met my next-door neighbor. My social battery was drained from talking to strangers all day. I knew if I went home, I wouldn't be motivated to meet them, so I mustered the courage and walked up their driveway. I had gotten used to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young guy with a mullet opened the door, I was surprised. He looked even younger than me, which was a shock. I quickly recovered and launched into my neighborhood introduction. He flashed a huge smile and interrupted me, saying something like, "Oh well, someone born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and vented about feeling out of place as a single guy in my late 20s among so many families. He assured me it was fine and that most residents kept to themselves, which was a relief. He introduced himself as Damon and invited me over for a drink sometime. I shrugged and suggested, "Why not right now?" expecting him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder as if scanning his living room. Then he told me he wished he could but was busy working. Curious, I asked what he did for work. His smile faded slightly. After a weird stare, he said finance, without elaborating, which I found odd. I asked if he had any roommates, and to my surprise, he said he lived alone, insane given the house's size. We chatted a bit longer, and he gave me his number before heading back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived there, especially since he seemed chill, yet I couldn't shake the oddness of him living alone, and yes, I was doing the same. But my house wasn't even half the size of his. That was about 6 months ago. For weeks, nothing eventful happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to set something up, but he always complained about being busy and apologized for not hanging out. Eventually, I gave up, not in a hostile way, but in a you-do-you manner. I'm not one to bend over backward for someone who seems uninterested. I never saw anyone come or go from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He didn't even get takeout delivered, which was strange since his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and my office is on the 3rd floor, overlooking Damon's property. If you were wondering how I knew so much about his habits, I know it sounds obsessive and a bit creepy, but his house was just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over occasionally. One night, specifically a Wednesday, I woke up around 2:00 a.m. to loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so I woke up easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it or dreaming. But I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were. 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. No mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not one to complain about noise. I've been to plenty of house parties. But it was a weekday, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just knock and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was clear from outside that it was a full-blown party. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some excuse later. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I noticed was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs. But something felt off. There was literally no one inside. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room or kitchen, but it was completely empty. No drinks left out. I could hear voices over the background music, which puzzled me. Listening closely, I realized it wasn't music at all. It was a recording, people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense. It didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, no doubt about it. I should have left immediately, but I needed to know what was happening. I stealthily navigated the house until I saw a door slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, leading to the basement. I can't explain how I knew, but something told me the answer was downstairs. It was dark down there, except for a faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. I knew I shouldn't go down, but I did anyway. At the bottom of the stairs, I looked around. The light was coming from another door deeper in the basement. I crept toward it, picking up on a noise I hadn't heard earlier over the music, a heavy, rhythmic grinding, like machinery or a buzzsaw. I got closer, close enough to see through the crack. 3 older men stood there, looking across the room at something out of view. They wore heavy-duty work clothes, goggles, and rubber gloves. I realized they were in work boots. Despite the shoes upstairs, I would have assumed they were construction workers under different circumstances. I wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a moment, I caught a whiff of a strong bleach smell or some kind of cleaning solution. That did it for me. A pit formed in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be quiet. As I found my way back, the light behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door. I didn't hear it over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I dashed through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run straight to my house. Instead, I jumped my fence and made it to my backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My heart raced, but I couldn't let Damon or anyone else know I had been snooping. I collected myself and went to my office, ensuring all the lights were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked at Damon's house. No one was there. But a few minutes later, the front door flew open. 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, driveway, and street. Damon wasn't with them. Everyone looked older, like those first men I had seen. A few appeared to argue, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One man shoved another, and I thought they might fight in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they went back inside, and the music stopped shortly after. I stood at the window, trying to process what had just happened. I considered calling the police, but what could I even say? The music was off, and there was no real crime to report. What puzzled me was how none of my neighbors seemed bothered by the noise, especially since many had kids. If they could hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no clue about those. The people I saw wore boots, so did they bring extra pairs just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and didn't know what to do. So, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. Days passed, Damon still hadn't returned. Or at least, his car hadn't. I was baffled as each day went by. I couldn't understand how my neighbors had slept through all the noise, so I straight up asked them. I visited several houses to see if they had heard the party the other night. No one knew what I was talking about even when I described which house it came from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago. The bizarre part is Damon still hasn't come back. It's clear no one is maintaining his house. The grass is getting long. And there's an untouched pile of packages against his front door. I don't know what to make of it. It could be nothing, but it feels like no one would go to such lengths to disguise their actions with a fake party unless it was illegal. But would people take such measures and forget to lock the front door? Maybe that's what those guys were arguing about. I really have no idea. None of my neighbors seemed bothered, making me think I'm caught up in some conspiracy. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether to ask him directly.